Hello, hello. It's Elizabeth Busby here, the Director of Programs for the Theology of the Body Institute. And today we are going to be taking a podcast listener question about chastity and boundaries. I don't know if you guys know this, but I also have a podcast. And on my podcast, I have in the show notes, there's this little place to send me a question. And I have a huge backlog of questions. And I was thinking it could be kind of fun to do some of them on YouTube. So hopefully there's some cross-pollination in my listeners, and the person who submitted this one will find it on YouTube. But if not, it was a good question for anybody, I think. So the question was, I'd like some advice for Catholic couples struggling to live chastity and maintain boundaries. What's something sustainable when marriage is still over a year away? What would you tell couples struggling with guilt, even if they haven't gone all the way? This doesn't mean the relationship is bad, does it? I loved this question. I love this question because you can tell that this person has this deep desire for an answer. I feel like I've said this before. I love when people ask questions and they're kind of exposing their heart in the question in a sense, because it just shows me how much they care about this stuff. They care about Jesus in their relationship. They care about the one that they love. So love this question. So some advice for people who are struggling to live chastity. So first of all, I want to say that the reason you're struggling to live chastity is because you recognize the goodness of what you're longing for, right? There's something in you that recognizes that there's goodness and beauty in the marital embrace. And you want that goodness and beauty. You want to share that love with the person. You want to give love to them in the most complete way you can, and you want to receive that love from them in the most complete way that you can. So I think the first thing that I want to say is just affirmation that you know that there's a goodness there that you guys are longing for and wanting. In our culture, and there are lots of other people who have said this in way better ways, I'm sure you can find them. My colleague Christopher has also said some stuff about this, but our culture, a lot of people grow up thinking sex is bad and dirty and ugly, and the reality is that it's so good and beautiful. And so when people recognize that it's something worth waiting for and that there's a struggle in that wait, I think you're just normal. I think that if you're in a relationship with someone and chastity isn't a huge struggle, meaning there's really not that sexual desire, there's really not the desire for that intimacy, that would probably be a problem to me, right? If you don't want intimacy with that person, I think that's not normal. I think it's good to want that intimacy. So first of all, I just want to affirm you. You're struggling to live this because sex is good and beautiful and you have that desire for the person you're with. That's awesome. Go you. Okay, but there are some practical considerations. The first and probably best piece of advice I have to give you is something my husband and I used. We affectionately called it the chastity puzzle. It's basically just a really big 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle that you use anytime you're really tempted. So my husband and I, when we were dating and engaged, we did a lot of puzzles because there was this deep desire for physical intimacy, and we recognized if we were to sit and cuddle and watch a movie, or we were to cuddle up and read something together, maybe we were not in the strongest place to be able to set that boundary. I don't know whose idea it was. It was probably my husband's. He's an engineer. He's very good at this sort of practical application stuff. He's like, what if we just did a jigsaw puzzle? So chastity puzzles, buy a jigsaw puzzle. It's very hard to have sex when you guys are both independently working on a jigsaw puzzle. So go chastity puzzles. But I also think that it's good to set up some good boundaries around your intimacy, all right? So if you guys are in a point where you're really struggling, maybe you guys the marriage is still a year away. So I don't know if these people are engaged or not. If you're engaged, maybe you're engaged and you're tracking your cycle in preparation for doing NFP when you're married, and you know this is a time where the woman is ovulating, maybe go out, go out with some friends, go out to dinner. Don't be at home watching a movie in a time where you know things are going to be extra tempting. Maybe when you guys are together and you are, one piece of advice I like to give people when you're together and you are doing something like watching a movie or reading a book or other great things, it's fine to do those things. One person should be vertical at all times. So obviously you can still get into some stuff if one person's vertical and one person isn't, but it's a lot harder. And by that I mean, if that's confusing, one person is sitting up at all times, so vertical. So you both aren't laying down and cuddling, because when you're both laying down and cuddling, it's not a far cry from other things that it's easier to be laying down and doing. So if one person is sitting up, that can also be helpful. Those are just a couple of tips for maintaining boundaries. And I think the last thing I want to say there too is don't be afraid to say it to the other person. I think it's appropriate to be able to have these good, healthy conversations. So I'm really struggling to maintain chastity right now. There's a deep desire to give myself to you, and maybe we should go get some ice cream instead. Like make sure that you guys are able to have those open communications. And if you're not able to have those open communications, that is something I think would be very helpful to work on. Explore, why am I not comfortable with it? What's the dynamic that we can't have these conversations, etc. So in maintaining boundaries, it's important to be able to talk about them. Okay, so something sustainable when marriage is over a year away. I'm gonna come back to the chastity puzzle, guys. I think it's really helpful. That's sustainable. Okay, now the second piece of this question about the guilt. So what would you tell couples struggling with guilt, even if they haven't gone all the way? And this doesn't mean the relationship is bad, does it? And I would say, no, it doesn't mean your relationship is bad. I think it means that you two have a love for each other and you recognize the beauty and goodness of wanting to give to each other. And perhaps you just didn't set up the appropriate physical boundaries in your environment, in your relationship. And so you cross that line. But that doesn't mean your relationship is bad. And there is this beautiful image, and it's this statue of Christ meeting the woman caught in adultery, okay? So I'm going to kind of call to mind that scene. We read over it like, we hear it proclaimed on the Sunday Mass, like the woman caught in adultery, and then she dee. But if you stop and think about what was going on, someone busted in on the two of them in this intimate moment, dragged her out into the street. She's probably not wearing any clothes. And in this image, she has like a blanket tossed over her, right? I cannot imagine what is going through this woman's mind, right? And of course, in that time, it was much more frowned upon for the woman than the man. We know in reality, it's both of them equally, but in that time, it would have very much been the woman. And when I think about what her heart, her mind, what she must have been, so embarrassed, so ashamed, all this stuff. And in the statue, Christ just gets on the ground at her level and holds her face in his hand. And the gaze between the two of them that was captured by this artist, it's got to look like that in real life, right? That it was so beautifully depicted. That is what I want all of you to feel when you find yourself having fallen into sexual sin, that the Lord meets you there so intimately in such a beautiful gaze of love for you. For those of us who are Catholic, we have the incredible gift of confession, right? The sacrament of reconciliation, where you're able to be reconciled back to Christ and the church from those. So I highly recommend that you take advantage of that opportunity to meet Christ in the confessional and allow that mercy to wash over you. But an important part of reconciliation that we know is that decision to go and attempt to avoid that in the future. So it's not appropriate to have the guilt. Well, I do think that there's something to be said when you fall into a sin, when you violate your dignity and the dignity of your beloved, of apologizing for that, right? And coming to the Lord and giving that to him and saying you're sorry to the Lord and to your partner and receiving that mercy, right? So guilt in the sense of it drives you to the humility to reconcile, to apologize. That is a good thing. Once you've done that apology, though, there's no room for shame. There's no room for flagellation, for beating yourself up. You have been forgiven by God. And it is arguably the sin of pride to think that God's sacrifice of his son on the cross wasn't enough to cover that sin, right? Come back to the Lord in mercy because he loves you and he wants you to be made new and he makes you new. But then the second piece of that is make changes moving forward. So have an honest conversation with your boyfriend or girlfriend. I don't know if this is a man or a woman, but have an honest conversation and say, how did that happen? And what can we do so that that doesn't happen again? And then make changes in your environment. Go buy a chastity puzzle or something. Go do something else and make the change so that doesn't happen again. So that's my advice. So if this was something that was helpful to you, please subscribe to this channel to catch more videos like this from me and from my colleagues about this kind of thing. Please share it with anyone that you think would benefit from it. And leave a like also. I'm bad at advertising. I'm so glad you're here. Please come back. Bye.